The force was not native to this world, but power recognized power all the same. In the veins of St. Louis, where the were-animals prowled, the shadows and vampire masters held court beneath the city's oldest buildings, something ancient stirred long before it arrived. The night air grew heavy first, a pressure behind the eyes, a taste of ozone on the tongue, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Anita Blake felt it before she saw it. She was 3 blocks from her apartment, gun already drawn out of habit more than need, when the streetlights along Delmar flickered and died in a wave, one after another, chasing something that moved faster than her eyes could follow. Then the air split. It wasn't like a portal from the movies, no shimmering doorway, no dramatic flash. It was more like reality tearing along a seam that had been weakened once before and never quite healed. And through that seam came Simi. She hit the pavement in a crouch, black curls wild around her face, eyes flashing gold red in the dark, and the first thing she did was sniff the air like a bloodhound catching a familiar scent. Acheron, she murmured, not a name Anita recognized, but the reverence in it was unmistakable. Whoever this creature was looking for, she wanted them badly enough to rip a hole between worlds to find him. This was the sequel to a night Anita hadn't fully recovered from. Months ago, a being calling himself Acheron had appeared in her city with no warning and no explanation, his presence alone enough to make every vampire master within 100 miles go quiet with something that looked disturbingly like fear. He'd vanished as suddenly as he'd come, leaving behind more questions than answers and a residue of power that Anita's necromancy had never quite stopped humming with. She'd told herself it was over. She should have known better. Simi rose to her full height, not tall, but somehow taking up more space than her frame should have allowed. And turned in a slow circle, nostrils flaring, until her gaze locked on Anita with unsettling precision. "You," she said, pointing one clawed finger. "You know where Acheron is. Simi can smell him on you. Old power, sleeping in your bones." Anita's grip on her gun tightened, though some instinct, the same one that had kept her alive through years of vampire politics and necromantic nightmares, told her a bullet wouldn't do much good here. "I don't know who Acheron is," she said carefully. "But if you're talking about the guy who showed up here a few months back and turned every master vampire in the city into a nervous wreck, then yeah. I might know something." "Acheron," Simi said, and just saying the name seemed to steady her, like an anchor thrown into rough water. Simi has been looking for so long. The tear between worlds, it does not stay open easy. Simi had to push hard, Acheron. Very hard. That was when Anita noticed the way the shadows along the street seemed to bend wrong around the newcomer, not the practiced stillness of a vampire or the coiled tension of a shapeshifter, but something else entirely. Something that made the ambient magic of the city, the low thrum of necromantic energy Anita always carried at the edge of her awareness, twist and shy away like a dog avoiding a raised hand. She'd learned a long time ago that the things which made her own power flinch were the things worth taking seriously. "Okay," Anita said slowly, holstering her weapon, not out of trust, but because pointing a gun at something that could apparently tear holes in reality seemed like a good way to get herself killed for no benefit. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say I even know where to start looking. Why does it matter?" He left. Whatever he was doing here, he finished it and moved on. Simi's expression flickered, something complicated passing behind those strange eyes, grief and fierce loyalty tangled together. Acheron did not leave because he wanted to. Something called him back before he was ready. Simi felt it snap, like string pulled too tight. And now, she paused, tilting her head as if listening to something only she could hear. Now something in this city is waking up. Something that remembers him. It will not be gentle when it finds him. Simi must find him first. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse suite above the old warehouse district, an ancient vampire who had not stirred from torpor in over 3 centuries opened eyes the color of dried blood and smiled for the first time in decades. The old one had felt that same tear in the world, that same impossible signature of power returning to a city that should have been beneath his notice. He had waited a long time for something worth waking for. Anita didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that the strange, golden-eyed girl standing in the middle of her street was radiating a kind of desperate certainty that experience had taught her not to ignore, and that whatever had walked away from St. Louis months ago was about to walk right back into it, whether the city was ready or not. "Come on," Anita said finally, gesturing toward her building. "You're not exactly subtle, and if I leave you standing in the middle of the street ripping holes in reality, RPIT is going to have questions I don't want to answer. We'll figure out where to start." Simi's grin was sudden, sharp, and entirely too pleased with itself. "Simi likes you already. If you want to see more legendary characters collide with Anita Blake's world, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see cross over next in the comments below. May the force be with you." The apartment felt smaller with Simi in it. Not because of her size, she was compact, almost delicate in build, but because of the sheer density of presence she carried, like standing too close to a bonfire even when the flames weren't reaching for you. Anita watched her prowl the perimeter of the living room, touching things with unsettling curiosity. The spines of books, the edge of a photograph, the hilt of a blade mounted on the wall that had killed more than one thing that used to be human. "You collect weapons," Simi observed, not quite a question. "Occupational hazard." Anita poured 2 glasses of water, more out of habit than hospitality, and set one on the counter within Simi's reach. "So. Acheron. That's not his name, is it?" "His title. Means master, in old tongue. Simi's Acheron is Acheron." She said the name again like it tasted good in her mouth, reverent and hungry at once. "He has had many names in many places. Acheron is the one Simi likes best." Anita filed that away, many names, many places. Whatever Acheron was, he'd clearly been doing this a long time, wherever this was. And the reunion is happening how, exactly? "Because last time he was here, I watched 3 vampire masters who survived since before this country existed go quiet and pale just talking about him. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I help you find him." Simi's grin faded into something more serious, gold eyes flickering to a deeper, more dangerous shade. "Acheron is old. Older than your gods, older than mine. He carries power that was never meant for one being to hold, not by choice, but by curse. He does not use it lightly, because when he does, bad things happen to the world around him." She paused. "Also, he is very tired. Has been tired for a very long time." That last part surprised Anita more than the rest, not the power, not the danger, but the exhaustion underneath it. She'd met gods before, of a sort. Old, terrible things wearing human faces. None of them had ever sounded tired. Before she could press further, her phone buzzed against the counter. "RPIT." She answered on the second ring, already bracing. "Blake." The voice on the other end was Dolph, gruff and clipped in the way he got when something had gone sideways fast. "We've got a situation at the old Ashworth warehouse district. Multiple deaths, and I mean multiple, 6 bodies, all drained, but not clean like a feeding. Torn apart. Whatever did this wasn't feeding, it was making a statement." "On my way." Anita hung up and looked at Simi, who was already watching her with an expression that said she'd heard every word despite the phone being nowhere near her ear. "That is not Acheron's doing," Simi said immediately, defensive. "Acheron does not kill like that. Not without reason, and never messy. I didn't say it was." But the timing bothered her. The same night Acheron's proxy tore a hole into her city, 6 people turned up dead in a way that read less like a hunting vampire and more like a message. Someone, or something, wanted attention. "You're coming with me. If this is connected to whatever's looking for your Acheron, I want you where I can see you." The warehouse district at night was its own kind of theater. Cracked pavement, sodium lights buzzing overhead, the particular quiet of a place that had been left to rot decades ago and never quite finished dying. Dolph met them at the perimeter, tape already strung, his expression flattening with suspicion the moment he clocked Simi. "Who's this?" "Consultant," Anita said, which was technically not a lie. "She might have insight into what we're dealing with." Dolph didn't look convinced, but he'd learned to pick his battles with Anita a long time ago. He led them past the tape to where the bodies had been arranged, and arranged was the word, Anita realized with a cold drop in her stomach. 6 corpses laid in a precise circle, throats torn but too clean to be animal, too ritualistic to be random. In the center of the circle, someone had scratched a symbol into the concrete. Old. Angular. Not any occult marking Anita had catalogued in 15 years of doing this job. Simi went very still beside her, the playful energy draining out of her like water through a cracked vessel. "This is old," she whispered. "Older than this city. Older than your country." Her gold eyes narrowed on the symbol, and for the first time since she'd torn through the veil, she looked afraid. "This is a summoning mark. Someone is calling something. Something that knows Acheron's name." "Calling what?" Simi didn't answer right away. Across the warehouse district, in a building that hadn't seen light in 3 centuries, the old one rose from his chair for the first time in a generation, and somewhere deep in his ruined, ancient chest, something that might have once been a heartbeat began, very faintly, to stir. "Something," Simi finally said, "that remembers when Acheron's power still had chains on it. Something that wants to put them back." Anita looked down at the ritual circle, at the 2 clean wounds and the strange angular symbol, and felt the familiar cold certainty settle into her gut, the one that always arrived right before things got very, very bad. By the time they left the warehouse district, the sky had started bleeding gray at the edges, false dawn, the kind that gave St. Louis's night creatures just enough warning to find shelter before the sun made the choice for them. Anita drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gun at her hip out of pure reflex. Simi sat in the passenger seat with her knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, staring out the window like she was trying to memorize the city's shape. "You said something wants to put chains back on him," Anita said finally. "What kind of chains?" Simi was quiet long enough that Anita thought she wouldn't answer. Acheron was born with more power than any single being should carry. His own family feared it. Bound parts of it away so he could survive being what he is. Her voice dropped, quieter than Anita had heard it yet. "It cost him much. He does not talk about it. Simi does not make him." Whatever had happened to Acheron in whatever world he came from, it had left scars deep enough that even his fiercely loyal companion tread carefully around the subject. Anita understood that kind of history better than she wanted to admit, the kind that didn't heal so much as get folded up small enough to carry without collapsing under the weight. They didn't have to look far for Acheron. He found them. Anita felt it before she saw him. The same pressure behind the eyes from the night before, but sharper now, more focused, like a held breath finally released. She pulled the car to the curb outside her apartment and stepped out to find a man standing beneath the streetlight who hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. He was tall, built like something out of old sculpture, dressed in black that seemed to drink the little remaining darkness around him. His hair was a shifting color she couldn't quite pin down, silver white in one light and deep auburn in another. But it was his eyes that stopped her, swirling, ever-changing, the color of something that had seen too much to ever look ordinary again. Acheron. Simi was out of the car and across the sidewalk before Anita had finished parking, throwing herself at him with the unguarded joy of a child. Acheron caught her easily, and for just a moment, the ancient weight in his expression cracked into something almost warm. "Simi." His voice was quiet, layered, like more than one person speaking at once and somehow harmonizing. "You shouldn't have crossed the strain. Simi is fine. Simi is always fine." She pulled back, gold eyes searching his face with obvious worry. "You are not fine, Acheron. Something pulled you back too fast." Simi felt it. Acheron's gaze shifted to Anita, and she felt the full weight of that attention land on her like a physical thing, assessing, ancient, and somehow gentler than she expected given everything Simi had told her. "Anita Blake," he said, and there was no threat in the way he said her name, just quiet recognition. "You helped Simi find me." "Thank you." "Didn't have much choice," Anita said, though it wasn't entirely true. "We've got bigger problems than reunions, though. 6 people are dead tonight. Ritual killing, some kind of summoning circle. Simi says it's connected to you." Something shifted behind Acheron's shifting eyes, not surprise, but a resignation so deep it looked like exhaustion given form. "The Ashkirians," he said, more to himself than to either of them. "I hoped I'd been wrong." "You want to explain that to the rest of us?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Anita had the distinct sense of watching someone decide how much truth a person could handle. "There are things that exist outside your understanding of gods and monsters," Acheron said finally. "Old powers, from before even my world had a name. Some of them have always wanted what I carry. When I left this city the first time, I thought I'd severed the connection that let them sense me. I was wrong. Something followed the trail I left behind, and now it's here, killing to open a door I need to stay closed." "Why here?" Anita pressed. "Why my city?" "Because you have magic here already running loose in the world, necromancy, shape-shifting, old blood. My kind of power resonates with places that already hum with strangeness. It's easier to hide in a storm than in still air." His eyes found hers again, and there was something almost apologetic in them. "I never meant to bring danger to your home. But it's here now, and it won't stop until it either has what it wants, or it's destroyed." Behind Anita, the eastern sky had gone properly gold, and with it came the low thrum of the city waking, cars, distant sirens, the mundane world grinding back into motion, utterly unaware of the war quietly gathering in its shadows. Somewhere across town, in a building 3 centuries dark, the old one's ancient eyes had not closed once since the night before, watching, waiting, sensing his own long game accelerating towards something he'd craved for longer than this city had existed. "Then we'd better figure out how to stop it," Anita said, "before it finds what it's looking for." Acheron looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind those endless eyes. And then, for the first time since he'd appeared beneath the streetlight, he almost smiled. "You have no idea what you're offering to help with." "Wouldn't be the first time," Anita said. "Won't be the last." The old one's name, when Anita finally dug it out of the city's oldest vampire records, was Calstrade, though even that name came with a footnote of uncertainty, buried in journals so old the ink had turned the color of dried blood. 3 centuries in St. Louis. Before that, nothing. No records, no lineage, no master who claimed to have made him. He'd simply appeared one night in the 1700s and taken the city's underworld by quiet, patient force, then vanished into torpor so deep most of the vampire community had assumed him dead, a bedtime story told to frighten newer masters into humility. "He's not just old," Jean-Claude said, when Anita brought the name to him that evening in his private office beneath the Circus of the Damned. The master of the city turned the page of the journal with careful fingers, blue eyes narrowing at the sparse, cryptic entries. "He's pre-vampire, ma petite. Whatever he was before he wore this face, it wasn't human, and I do not think it was entirely of our world at all." Acheron, seated in the corner with the stillness of something that had learned patience across centuries, finally spoke. "He isn't a vampire. Not originally. He's Ashkirian. An old bloodline of beings who fed on power itself, not blood. Somewhere along the way, he found a body that could sustain him here, and it happened to be one your kind would call vampiric. The hunger translated. The nature didn't." Jean-Claude's expression sharpened with the particular interest of a predator recognizing something above him on the food chain. "And he wants you." "He wants what's chained inside me," Acheron corrected quietly. "There's a difference, though it may not matter much once the chains are broken. Simi, curled on the floor near Acheron's feet in a form that looked disconcertingly like a large, contented cat, made a low growling sound without opening her eyes. Calstrade thinks he can control it. He is wrong. Nothing controls what's in Acre. It only ever gets loose. The room went quiet at that, the weight of the statement settling over everyone present. Anita had spent years learning to read danger in a room, the particular stillness of vampires deciding whether to strike, the coiled tension of words before a change, and what she felt now was different. Not the danger of a fight she might win. The danger of something she didn't have the tools to survive. Then we stop him before he gets the chance, Anita said, forcing steadiness into her voice. Ritual killings, summoning circles, he's building towards something. We find where, and we shut it down first. It won't be that simple, Jean-Claude said. Calstrade has had 300 years to build alliances in this city that predate anyone currently sitting in this room. Vampires who owe him blood debts older than the Louisiana Purchase. If he calls in those debts, ma petite, we may find half the city's masters siding against us before the first shot is fired. That was the complication Anita had been afraid of. This wasn't going to be a clean fight between good and evil, it never was in her world, but a tangled web of old loyalties, older grudges, and a power struggle that had been simmering since before the country she lived in had a name. Then we need to know who's still loyal to him, Anita said, and who might be willing to listen to reason instead. Jean-Claude's mouth curved, not quite a smile. I know one who might. Belmort's line has old grievances with anything Acheron, a rivalry from before either of us were born, if the stories are true. She may not fight for you, but she will not fight against anyone who opposes Calstrade either. Acheron rose from his chair, and the room seemed to shift subtly around his movement, the air pressing outward like the moment before a held breath finally releases. There's something else you should know, he said, and for the first time since Anita had met him, there was real weight of warning in his voice. Calstrade doesn't need to defeat me to get what he wants. He only needs to break me. Enough pain, enough loss, and the chains I carry weaken on their own. He knows this. It's why the killing started the way they did, a message, and a test. A test of what? Anita asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. Of how much I'm willing to let this city bleed, Acheron said quietly, before I stop holding back. Simi's growl deepened, low and protective, and even in her cat-shaped form, something ancient and dangerous flickered behind her golden eyes. Outside, the sun had fully set again, and somewhere across the sprawling dark of St. Louis, Calstrade's servants were already moving, laying the groundwork for whatever came next, patient, methodical, and utterly certain that time, as it always had, was on their side. Anita looked at Acheron, at the exhaustion beneath his composure, and understood with sudden clarity that this fight wasn't only going to be fought with guns and blades and old vampire politics. It was going to be fought in the space between Acheron's control and his breaking point, and she had no idea which side would win. Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance to test you again, she said. Whatever it takes. Belmort's line kept a house on the edge of the central West End, old brick, ivy-choked, the kind of building that looked abandoned to anyone without the sense to notice the wards humming faintly along its windows. Anita had been there twice before, both times under circumstances she'd rather not repeat, and both times had left her with a healthy respect for how dangerous beautiful things could be. The vampire who answered the door was new to Anita. Young by vampire standards, no more than a century, with the kind of severe elegance that marked Belmort's line like a signature. She looked at Acheron for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been recognition, or might have been fear wearing recognition's face. You're the one Calstrade's been hunting, she said. Not a question. I'm the one he thinks he's hunting, Acheron corrected, mild as still water. There's a difference, and it's going to matter a great deal to whoever's making choices in this house tonight. They were shown into a sitting room that looked like it belonged in a different century, all dark wood and low candlelight, and it was there that Simi's patience, never abundant to begin with, finally cracked. Simi is hungry, she announced to the room at large, in the tone of someone stating an obvious and urgent emergency. Simi has been very good, very patient, and no one has offered snacks. The young vampire blinked, clearly unprepared for a demon who negotiated diplomatic tension via appetite, but a moment later an older woman entered the room, silver-haired despite vampiric stasis, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who had genuinely stopped being afraid of anything centuries ago. She took one look at Simi and, to Anita's surprise, smiled. "There is fruit in the kitchen," the woman said. "Fresh, not blood-soaked, if that matters to you." "It matters very much," Simi said solemnly, and vanished from the room with a speed that left afterimages. Sabine, the older woman, introduced herself, settling into a chair with the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I've kept this house since before Calstrade woke the first time. I know what he is. I know what he wants." Her gaze moved to Acheron, sharp and assessing. "And I know that anything strong enough to make him rise after 3 centuries of sleep is either the answer to a very old prayer, or the beginning of a very old nightmare." "Both, probably," Acheron said, with the kind of dry honesty that seemed to surprise Sabine more than any diplomatic answer could have. Anita leaned forward. "We're not here asking you to fight him. We just need you to not fight against us. Calstrade's calling in old debts across the city. We need to know how many masters are actually loyal to him, versus how many are just afraid to say no." Sabine was quiet for a long moment, weighing something Anita couldn't see. "Calstrade's power was never built on loyalty," she said finally. "It was built on fear, and on very old, very patient manipulation. Most of the masters who owe him debts would gladly see those debts forgiven if given a way out that didn't look like betrayal." "Then help us give them one," Anita said. Sabine's smile turned thin and sharp, the smile of someone who had survived centuries of vampire politics by knowing precisely when to place a bet. "There is a gathering in 3 nights. Calstrade has called every master who owes him blood debt to attend, ostensibly to discuss the recent killings and calm the city's nerves. In truth, he intends to use the gathering to formally call in those debts, to build the army he needs before he moves against your friend directly." Acheron's expression didn't change, but something in the room's air pressure did, a subtle tightening that made the candle flames along the walls gutter and steady again. "Then that's where this ends, one way or another." "Perhaps," Sabine said. "Or perhaps it's where it truly begins. Calstrade has waited 300 years for this moment. He will not surrender it easily, and he will not fight fair. Whatever plan you make, old friend," she added, glancing at Acheron with something almost like sympathy, "make certain it accounts for the possibility that he already knows you're coming." The warning settled over the room like a held breath. Anita thought of the 6 bodies in the warehouse district, arranged with such careful, deliberate cruelty, a message, Acheron had called it, and a test. If Calstrade was capable of that kind of patient, theatrical menace, then walking into his gathering without a plan wasn't bravery. It was exactly what he wanted. Simi reappeared in the doorway, cheeks stuffed with fruit, gold eyes suddenly serious despite the absurdity of the moment. "Simi does not like this," she said around a mouthful of peach. 3 nights is not long enough to be ready, Acre." "No," Acheron agreed quietly, and for just a moment, the weight of centuries showed plainly on his face. "It never is." The 3 days before the gathering moved with the strange elasticity of time under pressure, too slow when Anita lay awake running through contingencies, too fast when she looked up and realized the sun had set again without her noticing. RPIT wanted answers she couldn't give them. Dolph's patience, never infinite, was wearing thin, and Anita found herself walking the increasingly familiar tightrope between the human world's need for explanations and the supernatural world's insistence on secrecy. She found Acheron on the 2nd night standing on her building's rooftop, looking out over the city with an expression she was starting to recognize. Not quite sadness, not quite calculation, but the particular stillness of someone carrying a weight too large to set down even for a moment. "You're not sleeping," she said, joining him at the edge. I don't, much. Not anymore. He didn't look at her, gaze fixed on the skyline. There was a time I slept for 11,000 years. I think it used up whatever appetite I had left for rest. Anita let that sit, unsure what to do with a number that large. Simi said something's chained inside you. Calstrade wants to break it loose. What happens if he does? Acheron was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. I was cursed by my own father before I was born, he said finally, voice flat in the way people got when a wound was old enough to stop bleeding but never old enough to stop hurting. Immortality, power beyond anything my world had names for, and enough restraint bred into me that I wouldn't destroy everything around me by simply existing. The restraint isn't a metaphor, Anita. It's structural. It's the only thing standing between the world you know and something that doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy once it's loose. And Calstrade wants to remove it. Calstrade wants to use it, Acheron corrected. There's a difference, and it's worse than you're imagining. He doesn't want me destroyed. He wants me weaponized, broken open just enough that he can direct what spills out. He spent 3 centuries in torpor because true power like that takes patience to court. He's not building an army for a war. He's building a ritual for a possession. The word landed hard, and Anita felt the shape of the danger reorganize itself in her mind, worse than she'd first understood. This wasn't a fight for territory or old grudges. Calstrade wanted to wear Acheron's power like a coat, and every death, every summoning circle, every carefully staged act of violence was a stitch in that garment. Then the gathering isn't just a trap, she said slowly. It's the ritual site. I believe so. 3 centuries of preparation doesn't culminate in a diplomatic meeting. Acheron finally turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his shifting eyes looked almost silver, ancient and tired and, underneath it all, afraid in a way gods weren't supposed to be able to afford. I need you to understand something, Anita. If this goes wrong, if he gets what he wants, I won't be the one you're fighting anymore. And I don't know if anything in this world can stop what comes out. It would have been easy, in that moment, to feel only fear. Anita had faced enough apocalyptic threats to know when the ground beneath a conversation had shifted into genuinely existential territory. But underneath the fear was something else, a familiar, stubborn refusal to simply accept inevitability, the same instinct that had kept her alive through every other impossible night this city had thrown at her. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong, she said. You're not the only one in this fight, Acheron. You've got Simi. You've got me, and whatever allies Jean-Claude and Sabine can rally. Calstrade's been planning for 300 years, but he's been planning against you alone. He hasn't planned for a city that decided to stand with you instead. Something shifted in Acheron's expression, not relief, not quite, but something adjacent to it, the particular loosening of a person who'd expected to carry a burden alone and found, unexpectedly, that they didn't have to. You people are strange, he said finally, something almost like humor threading through the words. In all the worlds I've walked, I don't think I've met anyone quite like the ones in this city. You look at impossible things and instead of running, you start making plans. Occupational hazard, Anita said again, echoing her own words from days before, and found herself almost smiling despite the weight pressing down on the conversation. Below them, the city continued its restless nighttime hum, unaware that in 3 days its supernatural order would either hold or shatter completely. And high above the streets, on a rooftop lit only by moonlight, an ancient being who had walked more worlds than he could count let himself, for just a moment, hope that this one might be different. The gathering was held in neutral ground, a converted cathedral on the edge of the old French district, deconsecrated decades ago and repurposed by the city's master vampires as the one space where blood debts and grudges were, by ancient agreement, set aside at the door. Anita had been inside twice before for far less dangerous occasions. Walking in now, flanked by Jean-Claude on one side and Acheron on the other, with Simi trailing behind in a plain dark coat that did nothing to disguise the barely contained energy radiating off her, felt like walking into a different building entirely. Candlelight instead of electric, some old superstition about the dead preferring firelight, cast the vaulted ceilings in shifting gold and shadow. Masters from across the city had gathered along the pews, dozens of ancient, cold-eyed predators arranged with the careful spacing of people who trusted no one, least of all each other. At the front, where an altar had once stood, Calstrade waited. He didn't look ancient. That was the first thing Anita noticed, and the thing that unsettled her most. No withered husk, no obvious sign of 3 centuries in torpor. He looked like a man in his prime, dark-haired, dressed in clothes that split the difference between old-world formality and modern tailoring, and his eyes, when they found Acheron across the room, held an expression of such patient, hungry satisfaction that Anita's hand drifted instinctively toward her gun. "You came," Calstrade said, his voice carrying easily across the cathedral's hush. "I confess, part of me doubted you would. Most things that carry what you carry learn to run rather than confront the inevitable. I've had 11,000 years to learn the difference between running and choosing my ground," Acheron said, his voice level, though Anita could feel the tension radiating off him like heat off asphalt in summer. "You've spent 3 centuries preparing a trap dressed as a truce. I'd rather meet it walking than be dragged into it." A ripple of unease moved through the gathered masters. Clearly, few of them had known the true purpose of tonight's meeting, and Calstrade's thin smile suggested he'd expected exactly this reaction and planned around it. "My friends," Calstrade addressed the room, spreading his hands in a gesture of magnanimous reassurance, "I called you here to discuss the killings troubling our city, and to remind you all of debts owed across centuries of my patience and protection. Tonight, I intend to collect on both fronts." The doors of the cathedral, heavy oak reinforced with old iron, swung shut on their own, sealing with a sound like a held breath finally released. Along the walls, shapes that Anita had mistaken for shatterwrought decoration shifted and resolved into shackled, silent figures, the summoning circle's missing pieces, she realized with cold understanding, arranged along the room's perimeter like anchor points for a working far larger than 6 warehouse deaths had suggested. "He's been building the circle around the whole room," Anita said under her breath. "The gathering wasn't the trap. It's the ritual chamber." Jean-Claude's expression had gone carefully, dangerously blank, the look of a predator recalculating an entire battlefield in real time. "Ma petite, I don't believe we walked into his trap so much as he built his trap around the one place he knew we'd have to walk." Calstrade raised a hand, and the candlelight throughout the cathedral guttered in unison, casting the room into a deeper, more expectant dark. 300 years, Acheron. 300 years I have waited, patient as stone, for a vessel strong enough to hold what I intend to take from you. This city, with its magic and its madness and its convenient isolation from the eyes of your old enemies, it was the perfect place to finish what I started centuries before either of us wore these particular faces. "You don't know what you're asking to hold," Acheron said, and for the first time, real warning crept into his voice, low and resonant enough that Anita felt it in her teeth. "What's chained in me isn't a weapon you point. It's a flood you drown in." "Then I will drown gladly," Calstrade said, and the hunger in his voice was the hunger of something that had spent 300 years convincing itself that annihilation and apotheosis were the same thing. "Begin." The shackled figures along the walls began to chant in a language that predated every tongue Anita had ever heard, and the air in the cathedral thickened with a pressure that made her ears pop and her necromantic senses scream in protest. Beside her, Simi's playful energy vanished entirely, replaced by something ancient and furious, gold eyes bleeding to a deeper, more dangerous red. "Acre," she said, low and urgent, "Simi thinks now would be a very good time to stop being patient." Acheron's shifting eyes had gone entirely silver, and for the first time since Anita had met him, she saw something in his expression that looked genuinely, uncomplicatedly dangerous. "Agreed," he said quietly, and the candles throughout the cathedral snuffed out all at once. Darkness in the cathedral didn't last. It broke apart a heartbeat later, replaced by a light that had no source Anita could name, not fire, not electricity, but something that seemed to bleed directly out of Acheron himself, silver-white and cold as starlight, throwing every shadow in the room into stark, trembling relief. The chanting along the walls faltered, several of the shackled figures crying out as the light washed over them, and for one suspended moment, the entire cathedral held its breath. "Now," Calstrade said, unbothered, almost delighted, "we begin properly." He moved, and Anita's eyes couldn't quite track how, one moment standing at the altar, the next a blur of motion that ended with his hand closing around empty air where Acheron had been standing a half-second before. The gathered masters, no longer bound by any pretense of neutral ground, scattered from the pews in a chaotic surge, some fleeing toward the doors, others, the ones who genuinely owed Calstrade centuries of loyalty, surging forward to join his side. "Jean-Claude!" Anita shouted, already moving, gun drawn, even knowing how little good it would do against what was unfolding. "The doors! Already on it, ma petite." Jean-Claude's voice carried an edge of real strain, vampiric speed straining to reach the sealed oak doors before the fighting masters trapped everyone inside a room about to become a battlefield between forces measured in centuries and continents. Simi didn't wait for instructions. She shifted mid-stride, the plain dark coat tearing away as her body reshaped into something with claws and wings and teeth built for exactly this kind of violence, and threw herself at the nearest of Calstrade's loyalists with a ferocity that made even Anita's considerable experience with supernatural combat falter for half a second. Acheron reappeared across the cathedral, breathing hard in a way Anita hadn't seen from him before, silver light still crackling faintly along his skin. Like barely contained lightning. "He's stronger than he should be," he called out, blocking a strike from Calstrade that sent a shockwave rippling through the stone pillars. The ritual, the chanting still feeding him, even broken. "We need to silence the circle." Anita didn't need to be told twice. She broke from the chaos, angling toward the nearest shackled figure along the wall, gun raised, and found, up close, that they weren't willing participants at all. Human, dazed, eyes rolled back white, mouths moving in words they couldn't possibly understand on their own. Victims, not conspirators. Calstrade hadn't built himself an army of loyal cultists. He'd built a machine out of people who had no idea what was being done to them. "They're not choosing this," she shouted across the cathedral, working the shackles with hands that shook only slightly. "Acheron, they're being used. I know." His voice was tight, strained under the effort of holding Calstrade back without unleashing whatever waited behind his own restraint. "Free them. It'll break the circuit." It took every ounce of Anita's training and stubbornness to work through the panic clawing at her chest as she moved from figure to figure, breaking shackles, dragging dazed and confused victims away from the ritual's edge while combat raged behind her. Simi a blur of claws and fury, Jean-Claude wrestling the cathedral doors open against the press of fleeing and fighting vampires, Acheron holding a centuries-old power at bay with a control that was visibly, dangerously fraying at the edges. She'd freed 4 of the 6 when Calstrade noticed what she was doing. "No," he said, and for the first time, real anger cracked through his composed menace. He turned from Acheron with terrifying speed, closing the distance to Anita before she could fully process the threat, hand closing around her throat with a grip that felt like iron. "You would unmake 300 years of patience for these disposable things?" Calstrade's dried blood eyes bored into hers, and Anita felt her necromantic senses recoil violently from the sheer wrongness radiating off him, something that had worn a human shape so long it had forgotten what human meant. "I could unmake you in a heartbeat, little necromancer. Let her go." Acheron's voice had changed. Deeper, layered, resonant with something that made the cathedral's remaining windows crack in their frames. The silver light around him had intensified into something closer to blinding, and Anita, even with Calstrade's hand crushing her airway, felt the temperature in the room plummet. "This is your only warning." Calstrade's smile didn't waver, but something in his grip did, a fractional hesitation, quickly suppressed. "There it is," he breathed, delighted despite the danger. "There's the flood beneath the dam. Show me more." He tightened his grip, and Anita's vision began to gray at the edges, the last two shackled victims still chanting weakly against the wall, the ritual still hungry, still unfinished, and somewhere behind the growing dark at the edge of her sight, she heard Acheron say her name like it cost him something enormous to keep from breaking entirely. The sound that tore out of the cathedral wasn't a roar, exactly, it was lower than that, older, something that seemed to come from the stone itself rather than any single throat. Every remaining window shattered outward in a shower of colored glass, and the silver light wrapped around Acheron didn't just intensify this time. It broke. Anita would never afterward find the right words for what she saw in that moment. The restraint Acheron had carried for 11,000 years didn't collapse so much as it simply, briefly, wasn't there, and in the space where it had been, something vast and terrible and achingly old looked out through his eyes at the world, weighing it, and did not yet choose to destroy it. Calstrade's grip on her throat loosened, not from mercy but from shock, and Anita dropped to the stone floor gasping, dragging air back into starved lungs while the cathedral around her groaned under a pressure that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with the sheer, unbearable presence now filling the room. Yes, Calstrade breathed, stepping back from Anita entirely, his attention consumed by the being unfolding in front of him. Yes, there it is. Give it to me. He reached out with both hands, some final piece of the ritual completing itself in the desperate chanting of the last two victims, and for one suspended, terrible moment, Anita thought they'd lost, that 3 centuries of patient cruelty were about to be rewarded with exactly what Calstrade had wanted. Then Simi hit him from the side like a falling star. She'd abandoned her fight with the loyalist masters the instant Acheron's control broke, some instinct older than language driving her across the cathedral in a blur that ended with Calstrade slammed through a stone pillar hard enough to crack it top to bottom. "No," she snarled, voice layered with something that wasn't entirely her own, gold eyes blazing molten in a face contorted with fury and terror in equal measure. "You do not touch him. You do not." Calstrade recovered fast, backhanding Simi away with strength that shouldn't have been possible even for something 3 centuries patient, and turned back toward Acheron with the singular focus of a man watching his life's work finally bear fruit. But the interruption had cost him something crucial, a half-second of Acheron's fracturing attention redirected, just barely, back toward himself. Anita watched Acheron's face in that moment and saw something she recognized immediately, because she'd worn that same expression herself more times than she wanted to count, the look of someone fighting not an enemy, but themselves, dragging a runaway force back from the edge through sheer, exhausted will. "Simi," he said, and his voice, though still layered and strange, had regained something of its own shape. "Get Anita clear. Acri, you cannot. Now." Simi obeyed, scrambling up despite the blow she'd taken and hauling Anita bodily away from the center of the cathedral, and in the space that opened up, Anita finally understood what Acheron intended. He wasn't trying to hold the power back anymore. He was choosing, with excruciating precision, exactly how much of it to let loose, a scalpel instead of a flood, aimed with the deliberate control of someone who had spent 11,000 years learning, the hard way, exactly what he was capable of. The light that poured out of him this time wasn't wild. It moved like something directed, a lance of silver-white force that crossed the cathedral in an instant and struck Calstrade with the precision of a blade rather than the chaos of an explosion. The ancient thing wearing a vampire's face didn't have time to scream before the ritual circle, the chanting, the 3 centuries of patient preparation, all of it simply unraveled at once, severed at the root by a power that had chosen, deliberately, not to become the flood Calstrade had wanted to drown in. What remained of Calstrade collapsed into ash and old dust, 300 years of borrowed time finally catching up to him in the space of a single breath. The last 2 shackled victims slumped, unconscious but alive, freed from a chant that no longer had anything to feed it. The cathedral, cracked and broken and littered with fleeing or fallen masters, went suddenly, profoundly quiet. Acheron stood alone at the center of it, the silver light fading from his skin, and for a moment he simply stood there, breathing hard, hands trembling with the effort of having pulled himself back from the edge of something that should have been unstoppable once started. Then his knees buckled, and only Simi's speed kept him from hitting the shattered stone floor. Acre. She caught him, gold eyes wide with fear that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with what came after. The cost, Anita realized, watching Acheron's face go pale and distant, of choosing restraint over annihilation with power that vast. Anita crossed the ruined cathedral floor, throat still raw, and knelt beside them both. Is he? He will live, Simi said, though her voice shook. But he spent more than he should have, holding back instead of letting go. This will cost him. It always costs him. Outside, the eastern sky had begun, once again, to lighten toward dawn, and across St. Louis, in the sudden absence of a power that had ruled its underworld for 3 centuries, something in the city's supernatural balance shifted, uncertain and unformed, waiting to see what would rise to fill the silence Calstrade had left behind. Acheron slept for 2 full days after the cathedral, the kind of sleep that looked less like rest and more like the body forcing a shutdown it had earned the hard way. Anita sat with him for part of it, in the quiet back room of the Circus of the Damned that Jean-Claude had offered without being asked, watching Simi curl protectively at his side in some smaller, softer shape and refuse to leave even to eat. When he finally woke, the shifting color of his eyes had settled. Not entirely, never entirely, but enough that the exhaustion in them looked ordinary rather than ancient. He found Anita first, sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed, and the corner of his mouth curved into something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. I didn't break the world, he said, voice rough with disuse. No, Anita agreed. You didn't. The city, in the days that followed, sorted itself out the way it always did. Messily, unevenly, with old power vacuums filled by careful negotiation rather than open war. Sabine's house quietly absorbed several of Calstrade's former loyalists, folding old blood debts into new, less predatory arrangements. Jean-Claude's position as master of the city, never seriously threatened, emerged strengthened by his role in the cathedral's aftermath. RPIT filed the warehouse killings under an unsolved case, the kind of quiet closure St. Louis's supernatural community had learned to manufacture when the truth was too large for official paperwork. Acheron and Simi stayed longer than either of them had originally planned, not out of necessity, but because St. Louis, for all its danger, had become something neither of them expected to find in a strange world, a place that hadn't run from what they carried. You could stay, Anita told them both, the night before they finally made preparations to leave. This city's seen stranger things settle in and become part of the furniture. Acheron considered that for a long moment, the weight of 11,000 years and countless worlds visible behind his ever-changing eyes. Maybe someday, he said. But there are other doors I've left ajar, other debts of my own to answer. Simi and I don't get to choose stillness very often. Simi will miss the fruit, Simi said solemnly, which was, Anita had come to understand, about as close as she got to sentiment. They left the way they'd arrived. A tear in the world, quiet and quick, gone before the sun rose. Anita stood on the same street where Simi had first landed, watching the scene close behind them, and felt the particular ache of an ending that wasn't quite goodbye. Whatever doors Acheron walked through next, whatever worlds waited on the other side of his restraint, St. Louis had left its mark on him, a city that had chosen to stand beside him instead of against him, if only for a little while. The old one's throne sat empty now, and the city's underworld held its breath, waiting to see what would rise to fill it. But for one quiet morning, Anita allowed herself to simply watch the sky lighten over a street that had, however briefly, played host to gods. Calstrade's 3 centuries of patience ended in a cathedral of broken glass and freed captives, and Acheron's restraint, tested to its absolute limit, held, though not without cost. St. Louis had seen gods and monsters before, but never quite like this, a being who could have unmade the city choosing, instead, to protect it. Anita Blake's world didn't run from the strange or the ancient, it simply made room, however uneasily, for one more impossible thing. Acheron and Simi vanished back into the space between worlds, leaving behind a city forever changed by their brief passage through it, a reminder that even beings who carried the weight of gods could choose restraint over ruin, and that some bonds, forged in crisis, outlast the doors that close behind them. Somewhere out there, other worlds wait for Acheron's shadow to fall across them. St. Louis will remember when it did. May the Force be with you. More stories await.